Let's see. The Real Charter asked on Instagram, do you write with your fingers or do you write with your wrist/arm?
My wrist arm.
Your wrist arm. How do you write, Drew?
I write with my wrist.
Yeah?
Well, no, with my fingers. Yes, I write with my fingers.
Well, you have to hold the pen with your fingers. So that's an important part of this.
My wrist isn't doing anything right there. So yeah, I write with my fingers. And unless I'm writing for a long time, and then it has to be a conscious thing for me to, because I know you're supposed to just write with your arm. You can write for long periods of time. I think that's healthier. But I have to make myself do that. I definitely don't do that. I haven't taught myself to do that instinctively. So it takes practice. It's a conscious decision when I do it, and I usually do it like, okay, I need to write something, and I'm like, all right, let me kind of switch gears. Kind of like switching gears in a car. Like I know I'm going up a hill. I need to knock it into first or second or whatever. But no, definitely not automatically. Instinctively, I write with my fingers.
Okay. I think that's pretty normal. I think that's how most people are, which, little fun fact. So when you're writing with ballpoints, pencils, whatever, the writing implements that are handy that most people are used to writing with, part of the reason that most people feel hand cramping when they're writing is because they're writing with their fingers. And if you think about it, you can think about it in a very simple way. Your fingers are not very big. So the muscles in your fingers are pretty small.
Yes.
So they are going to get tired quicker than your wrist. Your wrist has bigger muscles and all that kind of stuff versus your elbow versus your shoulder. So like the further up your arm you go, the bigger muscles you have, right? So your bigger muscles can go longer, especially with practice and stuff like that. So if you're writing with a long writing session using just your fingers, you're going to get tired. It's going to cramp. It's not going to be great. So when you're like getting true like calligraphy training and like Spencerian and stuff like that, it talks all about whole arm, and you got to practice like freaking crazy.
Yeah.
Because if you think about like if you are trying to, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Say you're trying to paint, right? And if you're trying to paint something really detailed and you're holding it very close to the brush, right way down on there, you have a lot of control, right? If you're holding it all the way back at the other end of the brush, you have a lot less control, right? Because it's just a lot further away. So in order to be able to use the larger muscles that can go for longer without hurting, you have less fine control with these muscles. Therefore, you have to practice a lot to get good at having fine control with your bigger arm muscles. So that's why Spencerian specifically, and a lot of like traditional calligraphy training drills practicing like crazy, because in order to write a lot for a long period of time with control, you have to build up your larger muscles to have that fine motor control. You're not going to build up your finger muscles to have the strength of your shoulder.
Not with
That's
that
like
attitude.
Not. I'd like to see what you look like with these like
It's gonna look amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to see that. So that's not going to happen.
You didn't answer the question though. What do you write with your wrists or your arm?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
So more context. So you take a more modern approach towards this. Spencerian goes back to like the 1800s, right? So very classical. Michael Saul, so he's a master penman, teaches a lot. He basically revived modern handwriting and taught pretty much most of the modern masters.
And we sell one of his books, do we not?
We do sell one of his books, and he explains some of this in his book.
Oh.
So it's called The Art of Cursive Penmanship. But he has another book about Spencerian specifically that we don't sell. I don't know if he offers it other than like he's sold it at pen shows that he like prints out on his own printer kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember that one.
I bought one of those and he explains more detail, but he does explain this in The Art of Cursive Penmanship. So yes, traditionally you want to work up your biggest muscles and have whole arm movement and stuff like that. That's what's espoused by Mr. Spencer. But Michael Saul, he essentially has like a blended approach. So he says you use some fingers, some wrist, some elbow, some shoulder. So you basically practice, and it's kind of like the best of all worlds. It's like, it's like if you are trying to go a long distance on a bike and you only have like the highest gear. It's going to take you a long time to get up to speed, but then once you are, that's the best gear to be in. That's like the whole arm calligraphy thing. It's going to take you a while to get there, but then it's the most efficient thing to do.
Right.
Whereas if you have, a really big gear, you're going to be able to sprint and get up to speed really fast, but then you're going to be pedaling like crazy. You're going to get really tired and you're not going to go that fast. That's like using just your fingers. using the blended approach, like Michael Soul says, is like having a bike with multiple gears that you can change. So you can start out in a high gear, you change gears, so you're using a blend of different muscles, and you're still using some of the fine control in your fingers, but you're also using your elbow and shoulder and all that, and you're getting kind of the best blend of both. So that somebody who doesn't write as much, like all day practicing like crazy, you're going to get some of the benefits, but you still get some fine control. So that's what he touts, and that's generally what I try to remember to do. I can't say I'm like well enough practiced to say that I specifically do it that way every time, everything I'm writing, but that is what I keep in mind when I'm writing, is trying to, and posture comes into play too. If you like are resting your elbow on the table, you're not using your shoulder because your elbow is planted, right? So like when I'm writing more than just a couple words, I will have my elbow at a 90 degree more or less with my shoulder, kind of hanging my arm so I can have full movement. And I will keep in mind moving my arm and shoulder and everything and not just using my fingers. So a blended approach is the best way.
Nice.
Boom.
All right.
Little deep dive. Like that's like a kiddie pool dive.